What's up guys? I thought I'd do a Q&A answering a bunch of questions you guys had, and we are going to start with a bunch of questions that came from the Gorails Slack channel. But if you have other questions you'd like me to answer, let me know in the comments below and I will do another Q&A in the future. So let's start off with a couple questions from Shaky Code. Number one is, what was your most challenging project ever? This is a project I did a few years ago called Giver. At the time, I wasn't super experienced in Rails or anything, but I was hired to do a consulting project where we were building something that processed the Twitter fire hose. So we were processing the Twitter fire hose for any tweets with the hashtag of give in it, and we were looking for tweets that had a $sign, an amount after the $sign, and the Twitter handle of a nonprofit. And so we were processing those tweets in real time to actually make real-time donations on Twitter. So it was a really interesting project, and it was during the presidential election that we were ramping up for, and hopefully it was going to be used in that. It never did, and so it never really took off, and the project didn't really go anywhere afterwards. So it was a pretty big project because we actually had to be ready for all of the volume of traffic we were expecting. So we were hoping that there would be a ton of tweets that would come in with the hashtag of give and a dollar amount and all that, and we would have to go put those on a queue, create a bunch of workers to go then pull those off and process them, and then save the results in our database. And so we were doing all of that. On the back end, I had some help on the front end doing CSS and layouts and some of that stuff. We even built an embeddable widget you could put on another website and all that. And it was a really big challenge for the experience that I had at the time. Next question, if you weren't writing code, what would you be doing? I don't know. Probably I would be into building stuff with like physical stuff. Maybe architecture, I'm not sure. I thought about being an architect as a kid, and I also really like cars. Both of those are similar, like technology focused and whatever. So if I wasn't programming, I'd probably be doing something like that. Question number 3, what is the thing you love and hate the most about programming? I love the most about programming is hearing from people that use my software. So finding out that whatever I built actually helped them save like months of their time or something like that is amazing to hear, and that is why I do this. And the reason why I hate it is because there's so much hype around getting into programming so you can be rich and you can do all these cool things. There's too much hype around what's new and what's cool, and there's not enough people actually doing this to really build stuff. Because what I care about is people using my software. I don't care what technology I use to build the software. It can maybe help me a little bit here and there if I use one framework over another, whatever, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. The only thing that matters is actually making something people use and being able to do more of that. King601 asks, can you share some of your most memorable experiences when learning to code? Two things come to mind. The first time that I really heard from someone who used my software and took the time to write me an email saying, oh my god, I appreciate this so much. That was the best feeling in the world. I had a bunch of those on this project called Gorails back when I was in college. It was for installing software on offline Linux computers. I just made this open source project because I had dial-up at my parents' house, and it would be useful for me. So I made it and open sourced it, and I found out that people in rural Texas were using it. Someone in South Africa used it to set up a computer lab for their school because they didn't have good internet there. That was amazing. Someone in the US government used it to install software in a super secure government computer, which that blew my mind as a college student, that I'm building stuff that people are using and changing lives with. That's awesome. The other story I wanted to tell was I really enjoy learning and discovering new ideas. So one of the things is when I was programming, I was trying to build an IRC client because I didn't know how it would work. Like, if you wanted to build your own, what would you have to do? So I just took Python and a socket connection to Freenode and just tried to build my own. And as part of doing that, I actually discovered metaprogramming without actually knowing the term for it. I basically knew that it's gonna send me a message, and the first word in that string, I wanna call a method with the exact same name. So is there a way for me to take this string and convert it into a method call? And all of that stuff really blew my mind at the time. But as I was learning it, I was like, whoa, this could be really powerful. And then I got into Rails and learned about how it works with all of the metaprogramming behind the scenes, and that was really what made me fall in love with Rails. Carter DEA asks, what upcoming or newish technology are you most excited for and why? This is a lame answer, but I really like Vue.js, and I want to see that used a lot more. E. Minkle asks, how did you enter the market on consulting for Rails or technical projects? And how consistent is the work, and is it rewarding? So I don't consult anymore, and that will get into the rewarding part of the question. But how did you enter the market was relatively interesting. So I'm gonna record a separate video on this. But basically I just found a random job board while I was in college and emailed the dude. It was really consistent because I was everywhere in the community. People knew that I was a good developer in town, and I was at all of the events, so I was always top of mind, and that made finding new work pretty easy. As far as how rewarding it is, consulting was kind of this two-sided coin. On one hand, I got to do a new project every couple months, and they would be awesome projects, and I would get to learn a lot of new stuff and do that very, very quickly. So it was very good for me to learn lots of new stuff really quickly. The downside was that oftentimes the clients weren't actually the best people to make decisions about their own software. So my expertise being a developer, I know what software is intuitive to use and what is too complicated for users and things like that. So as I'm trying to advise them about how we should design these features, they're often saying, let's just add more stuff. And I was like, no, that's not the right answer. Like, we need intuitive, we don't need more features. We can add those things in when they make sense, but if you predict that one person is gonna use that feature, we don't need to go build it yet. And that's gonna save you money, and it's gonna save us a lot of time. So we would have a lot of those back and forths, and I eventually got really tired of that and quit cold turkey and started working on Gorails, and we are here today. So now I do Gorails full time, and that's kind of amazing. So thanks to all you guys for making this possible. Ahad asks, what tools do you regularly use? Pretty much just Rails, Vim, Terminal, iTerm specifically. I use Postico occasionally. Why did you select them? I really just wanted simple tools and a small suite of them so that I could get up and running on any computer really quickly, but I also wanted to learn them really, really deeply. So learning as many shortcuts as I can and really deeply learning those tools, as opposed to having 50 tools that I only know a couple features of. What's the main obstacles you encountered with other tools? I mean, mostly the same thing of just, if I have too much stuff, I don't get to know any one tool that well, and I don't become really good at it. So I picked the ones that I wanted to get really good at and focused on those. He also asked, how do you select the gems you tend to use in your projects? Pretty much I always build a feature from scratch in a blank Rails application. So whether that's tagging or users, authentication or authorization, or like, you name it, any feature I try and build from scratch. And the reason why I do that is because then it gives me an idea of how that feature works and the trade-offs of going in different directions with that feature. Because no matter what you're building, you have different options you can go do, and a gem has chosen to go one approach. Devise is an example of that. I am more than comfortable to go into Devise and see how it works, and you know, go fix anything that I need to, or just to go in and understand if I need to tweak it for something, I can go into the source code of the gem and then understand how it works so I can figure out my solution that works and it integrates well with that. So I use that for pretty much every gem. There are some where I don't care about that, like the stripe gem or OmniAuth or whatever. I don't particularly care about how the internals of that works because I don't need to ever really tweak that. Ahad also asks, what's your level of comfort in respect to things like design patterns, enterprise architecture, and best practices? For example, all of those, I would say that you are best off learning those manually, like discovering those, and then actually going and applying that stuff. So for example, I learned design patterns by actually writing software with no structure. So with Rails, you're a little bit handicapped because you already have MVC built in and it's organized that way. But if you go and write your own Ruby or Python or C or JavaScript applications and you have no folder structure or anything like that, what do? And I did a lot of that for years before I got into web development, because web development was the only place that really encouraged using MVC. The rest of the stuff that I was doing, desktop software, command line stuff, it doesn't care what organization you use. As you end up building those applications without any structure, you end up discovering the reason why those design patterns exist. So you design some feature and you're like, this is pretty messy, I think I can clean it up somehow. And you end up building some sort of, wrapper around your business logic, and then all of a sudden you have service objects or whatever, and you start to learn that stuff and the real reasons why those design patterns exist. And that's gonna always be the best way to learn that stuff because you deeply, deeply understand all of the reasons why you have to go and do those things in bigger projects. So I would say I'm very familiar with a lot of them, but not all of them. And he also asks, how would you say you go about getting familiar with those concepts? I would say exactly what I just told you. Go build stuff that actually has no structure and then see what happens. Like, that stuff is going to emerge somehow. And if you make a mess and then you actually clean it up successfully, those are gonna be your design patterns, and you can think about that stuff very intuitively later on. Daniel Pence asks, I'd love to hear your thoughts on your experience building and growing Gorails. I suspect a lot of folks learn Rails because they want to build a product or start a business. What things should they consider that they may not have thought of yet? Infrastructure, scale, cost, etc. Something around the idea of business of coding or similar. While you might think that infrastructure and scaling and costs are the thing that matter, they're the easiest thing that we have right now. You can spend 300 bucks a month on Heroku and scale your app up to support tons of people. The thing is, if you can actually get that many people interested in using your product. So I would actually say that in almost all cases, what I see are people who think that the software matters more than the actual rest of the business. And that's a tendency of developers and the culture that we have around programming these days and building apps and whatever, is you think that you have to have perfect software before you can go build your business and start marketing it and whatever. It's really not the case. The software is the thing that needs to support that. And of course, if the software doesn't work, then you're not gonna have a business. But really, the business, as software exists inside of it, it's a really small piece compared to everything else. So that's the same experience that I've had on Gorails. The Rails app for Gorails itself is probably the least of my concerns. The most important thing is to make content for you guys. And the second most important thing is to make sure that that gets shared out so that you guys can come and find out about it and join the community and actually learn stuff and make it a place where you actually want to be. And so the software can help make that a place where you want to be, but that's about it. I'll go more into Gorails in other videos because I want to talk about what it has taken to build it up over these 3 years that I've worked on it, and also some of the future plans that I will be releasing in this coming year, hopefully. So I have some other projects that are related to Gorails that I want to launch, and we'll talk about those soon. So yeah, that wraps up the Q&A for this week. I hope you enjoyed these, but if you have other questions that you would like to hear answered, leave them in the comments below. I'll gather those up and answer them in the next Q&A. And next video, I will explain that story of getting my very first consulting job, because I think it was just a really good lesson for myself. I look back on, you know, putting myself out there and getting that very first consulting job, and it really changed the trajectory of where I was headed. And I think that makes sense to have a dedicated video on it, so I'll talk to you then.